Hey everybody, my name is Eric with Smart Pot Fabric Planters, and welcome to the Growing Revolution. We're really excited today. We have a special guest, the Guru of Ganja, Ed Rosenthal. Ed, everyone knows you as the Guru of Ganja. How old were you when you first got introduced to cannabis, and what did it do for you?
I was 21 when I first started using it, and uh, I think that it's changed my life. It's helped to give me insights to think outside the box and to help me become myself.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reveals you to yourself.
Yes, it does. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of navel searching
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
uh, with cannabis, but I think that it has been a really positive experience.
And when did you first start cultivating? And what was that setup like?
I first started cultivating shortly after I started using it, and at that time, most marijuana came with seeds because it was before Sensimea. A lot of it was Mexican or Colombian,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, the reason why I started growing is because I had always had an interest in plants and in cultivation of plants, and had taken classes as a child at the New York Botanical Gardens, which had classes for gardening for kids. And my goal in life was, from high school, was to become a geneticist, and so I stayed pretty close to that.
Yeah. Now, when did you move from New York to California?
August 17th, 1973.
Okay, so were you kind of in the cultivation scene before moving to California then?
Well, I came out to California to work on the 1972 marijuana initiative, and once I was in California, I realized that was actually my home, and so within months of coming there, I had moved.
Nice, nice. Now, with your experience with High Times Magazine and your new edition of the Cannabis Growers Handbook here, what would you say is the biggest struggle that the average cannabis grower has? Tough question because it's people who think it's easy to grow cannabis. It's not. If you've ever tried, it's not.
Well, on the other hand, it isn't hard to grow cannabis either.
If you
So
if you
if
know
you,
what you're
if
doing.
you know what you're doing, and cannabis is a kind of a vigorous plant that uses a lot of resources, a lot of light, a lot of nutrients, and it's a fun plant to grow. And one of the things that separates cannabis from many other plants is that most plants have both male and female on the same plant. And cannabis, on the other hand, like 5% of other seed plants, has separate male and female plants. And that makes it much more interesting and gives people a feeling of closeness to the plant. It,
What's your impression of smart pot fabric planters?
they're an excellent means of cultivating all kinds of plants, whether it's vegetables or flowers. And they make it much easier to grow because you can sep- they're easy to fill, they're easy to keep, and to move, and they do a great job.
And I know one of your biggest points that you teach is roots need oxygen, and smart pot's going to do better at that than any other rigid-sided container
Yeah,
for
a
sure.
rigid container doesn't allow as much flow of oxygen as a soft container does.
Hmm.
So small parts are right there.
Awesome. What's your favorite growing method? Soil, cocoa, hydro, aeroponics?
Well, I love to grow plants, and different plants have different preferences of what they like, but I grow all sorts of plants from orchids to vegetables to a lot of different house plants, and of course cannabis. And there are so many different ways to grow, and they're all right, and they're all correct, and there are a lot of variations. And I just like growing plants a lot, so I like doing it a lot of different ways.
And experimenting too,
Yeah.
and
Oh, yes.
that's half the fun
Yes.
is trying new things and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yes. But one of the things that I've tried to do is to help to develop or learn new methods that make gardening easier. And so gardeners today have such a choice, such a large choice of ways of growing, and they're all correct. It's what you feel comfortable with and what you like to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think of the current state of the cannabis industry, nationwide? What are your thoughts on that? And I guess, where do you see it going in, the next maybe 5 years or so?
Well, it varies a lot from state to state. And for instance, right now, ironically, Oklahoma has some of the most progressive cannabis laws in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I think is going to happen with cannabis, and I think that it's very important that people should be able to grow their own. That no matter what kind of different laws the states have, one thing that all the laws should do is permit home cultivation so that people can grow their own.
I agree. I don't think people should have dispensaries as an option, but they shouldn't be relegated to that.
Well, there are a lot of people that for one reason or another don't want to grow their own. They use a small amount where it just doesn't really pay to do that, or they might not have the time or the space to grow. And certainly the dispensaries have specialized products that people might not be able to make. So there's certainly a room for commercialization of cannabis, but it's just like tomatoes. There are all kinds of companies that are involved in tomatoes, from giant international corporations through small farmers to somebody who's growing in their yard and supplies a restaurant. But more tomatoes are grown in the United States by home growers than by farmers and by commercial growers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to see cannabis become a product like that, where most cannabis is grown by home growers.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of going back in time, is there anything that you miss about the good old days, or the kind of pre-legalization days, or has everything been positive?
Well, the most positive thing about it is that fewer people are going to prison for cannabis, and nobody should be in prison for it. And anybody who agrees with that, they might want to check out Last Prisoner Project, which is trying to stop people from being placed in prison and to get prisoners out, marijuana prisoners out of prison. It's just outrageous that some people are becoming billionaires from cannabis and other people are suffering in prison for the same thing. It's outrageous.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm a big fan of the Last Prisoner Project too. They're doing some great work. Now, you're a cannabis pioneer. You've done a lot of things, from High Times, the Hash and Cannabis Museum in Amsterdam, your books. What are you the most proud of?
Well, I don't know. I have a deep pride in my new book. I think I didn't write it alone. I wrote it with Dr. Rob Flannery, who has a PhD in plant biology and runs Dr. Rob Farms, and Angela Baco, who's been involved in cannabis literature for 15 years. And so I think that we did as a team something that no one individual could do, and that is put this book together. And we also engaged with any number of other cultivators and researchers, scientists, professors, so that the number of people involved in writing this book numbers more than 30.
Oh, wow.
And so it was quite a unique project, and I feel that this book will help hundreds of thousands of people.
What edition are you on now with this Cannabis Growers Handbook?
This is the 6th edition.
Wow. And what would you say is kind of the new stuff that's in this edition versus like the edition I have from 12 years ago?
Well, we have a lot more on light, for instance, and how to measure light, and the new methods that people are using in measuring that.
LED has come a long way since then.
That's right, and actually looking at the amount of energy that the plants are receiving from the light, and we cover that in a big way, and also fertilization. There's a lot more on that, but it's just in all different areas and giving people ideas about different methods of cultivation. And you know what the right method of cultivation is?
Whatever works, right?
The one that you feel comfortable with.
Yep.
That's the right method.
Yeah.
And there is no wrong method of cultivating as long as you're providing what the needs of the plants. And the idea is plants do talk, and they tell you what they need. And the way that they talk is not through verbally, but it's by looking at the plant and see what it's doing, see if it has nutrient deficiencies, and all of that, those symptoms of any kind of problem are how the plant talks, and it's a universal language.
Absolutely. Now, besides picking up, your copy of the Cannabis Growers Handbook here,
Here it is.
Yeah. Beautiful cover, by the way. Any last words of advice to the beginner grower who, has never grown a plant before and is curious and wants to give it a run?
Well, the first thing is growing plants is fun. It's fun it's fun, and it is uplifting. And when you grow cannabis, I have to give you a warning about that. Using cannabis probably isn't addictive, and although it might be a little bit habit forming, but growing it is addictive. And I know people who used to use cannabis and no longer use it, but they can't stop growing it. And it's because it's such a unique plant and responds so quickly and so well to different environmental inputs.
Yeah, there's no other plant that can vary so wildly based on environmental inputs, growing methods, nutrients. I totally agree.
And it's truly fascinating. And as I said, growing marijuana is addictive. So.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for your time on the Growing Revolution, and everyone should definitely pick up a copy of Ed's book, or he's got lots of other publications that he's done over the years, and just really want to thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Can I ask one real quick question? I'm just wondering, how do you think growing cannabis overlaps with the whole grow your own farm to table? Seems like there's a whole movement here of which growing cannabis is kind of a part of it, or kind of a leader, or
cannabis has been the introduction for many people to agriculture or to growing plants. So it might have been the first plant they grew, but not the last.
But not the last.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I do one other thing, just since we're in Oklahoma, you told me a story a year or two ago of kind of a sad story of how you came to Oklahoma, and it's great to have you on a happier note here.
Oh, yeah. Well,
in the state. So I do remember that story that I'm sure you remember it.
well, the first time I came to Oklahoma was for the trial of Will Foster. And
Yeah.
he was growing cannabis in a 5-foot by 5-foot area in his basement. And the state contended that he was supplying all of Tulsa with cannabis from that 5 by 5-foot garden. Very productive garden.
Very
It must have been very productive. But and he was given 93 years by the jury, and actually he was given more time by the jury than the law allowed. But after 4 years, he was released in my custody as long as he left Oklahoma, and so he stayed with me for almost a year. And after spending 4 years in prison here, and it was in old McAllister Dale. So that was not a very happy time, and it's ironic that now Oklahoma had some of the most progressive laws regarding cannabis, and it's great that it does. And I think that it's really good for the people of Oklahoma, and whether or not they use cannabis, their resources aren't going to be wasted on these legal things that did nothing to help society, and people can grow their own and feel free. And everybody likes to feel free, right? I'm free.
Happier times, yeah.